Good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar, Stories for Climate Change Witnesses. I welcome you on behalf of all of the staff of Catholic Climate Covenant. My name is Maggie McCarty, and I'm the Director of Development there, and I'm going to be your moderator today. I thought that given that it's Advent and given that there are some significant things that happened in Paris over the weekend in terms of climate change, we might begin with just a small prayer. So let us remember that we're in the holy presence of God. Good and gracious God, we ask your blessings on our presenters today as they share their stories with us. And we add a prayer of thanksgiving for the historic decisions made in Paris this weekend at the United Nations Conference on Parties on Climate Change. Bless us and bless all those adversely affected by climate change. May we all care for our common home and care for the poor. Amen. So let me remind you of the timeline for today's program. We're scheduled to go for 45 minutes. Each presenter has been given about 15 minutes or so to give their overview of the presentation, and then we'll open up the last 10 or 15 minutes for questions from you who are listening in our audience today. These questions are going to be written and shared with the presenters, and in case you want to write your questions down as you go along, I invite you to look to the far left of your screen where there is a black box, and at the bottom of the box, you will see a little place that says type your message here. That's where you're going to type in your messages. And then there's a drop-down arrow just above that box. And if yours does not say share to presenters, please click on that so that your comments are shared with the presenters so that they'll be able to see it as we go along. But we're delighted today to have two presenters, and they're going to share their stories on climate change from two My line is now unmuted and you apparently can hear me. I'm so sorry. I dropped off. I think I was about to change a slide and I hit something bad. So I hope you were with me moments ago. I was about to begin to introduce our presenters who not only come to us from two different countries, from two different perspectives, and of course, two different continents. So our first is Daniel Patrick McQuillan. He's a program manager regarding agriculture for Catholic Relief Services. He leads the CRS Guatemala's agricultural work across a varied portfolio of projects, including food security, soil and water management, and coffee production. Previously, he worked in agricultural programming in the Ecuadorian Amazon and at a rural orphanage in Honduras. Dan has a master's degree in international development and tropical agriculture. He is from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and has worked as a cowboy on ranches for years across the Colorado Rockies. Dan and his wife, Ludi Roja, just welcomed their first child, Francis Patrick McQuillan, and together the family grow and home process their own Christmas and Easter coffee blends. Our second speaker, thank you, Dan. Our second speaker is Rob Gorman. He's the Executive Director of Catholic Charities for the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux in Louisiana. Dan has been with Catholic Charities in Louisiana for more than 3 decades. He was the founding chair of the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, the founder of the Tri-City Interfaith Stewardship Initiative, and the past chair of the Louisiana Interchurch Conference Commission on the Stewardship of the Environment. He served on the National Advisory Committee for the United States Catholic Conference Environmental Justice Program and has worked since its formation with the National Religious Partnership for the Environment. He has been active in assisting communities in Grand Bois, Gibson, and Morgan City, and in opposing toxic and hazardous waste operations. He's testified and conducted on workshops in environmental justice and stewardship issues throughout the country, including testimony to the President's Council on Sustainable Environment and also to the President and the Vice President at the White House. So we're delighted to have both of them with us. We're going to start our presentation with Dan. And if you did not see Rob, I will show you him before I move on to the next slide. But Rob Gorman from Houma-Thibodaux and Dan McQuillan from from Guatemala, excuse me, I almost said Honduras. So with this, I'm going to close out my screen, and I give you Dan McQuillan. Dan, I'm afraid I have to tell you there's no audio for you. Despite all of our checkings, the audio is not working. So,
Dan, if you hit the microphone.
There you go. Oh, wait, somebody is speaking. It might be Rob. Dan, can you try again? No audio. We did test all this out, folks, before we went online, so we'll just give Dan a minute. Can you talk and see if we can hear you? Dan, on the upper part of your screen, make sure that your mic is not muted. It's the black bar that runs across the top of the screen next to your camera button. Okay, it says it's on. You want to try again? Nothing. All right, I'm going to let you mess around with that for a little bit. Jump in at any time, but why don't we run to Rob? I'm going to advance the slides, folks, so that we go to Rob. And Dan, I'm just going to ask you to kind of work on it for a few minutes and see if you can't get it to go. But we'll meanwhile have Rob present. Okay with you? Yeah, okay. All right, let me just advance his slides real quickly. And we're going to go on. And Rob, we're going to have you jump in while Dan works on his audio.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes, now I can. I hear you. Go ahead.
So here in Louisiana, let me put a background on the history of the impact of climate change on us. We're kind of the canary in the coal mine. Climate change, we're one of the lowest lying areas of the United States. And what we set up is what's called relative. Here in coastal Louisiana, the land is naturally subsiding because it's organic soils that were built up from deposits from the Mississippi River. And so that naturally subsides. The problem is it's no longer accreting because the Mississippi River has been cut off from new delta building in order to preserve area living from flooding. So we levied off the river. So the land is sinking. At the same time, because of climate change, so you have a situation with sinking land, rising seas, and so our relative sea level rise is a challenge for us. Now, what we've done to address that at Catholic Charities over the past 30 years is that we have presented as an issue of environmental stewardship, coupled with a very practical approach to preserving our coastal wetlands and barrier islands. Some of the things we've done here at the office and in conjunction with Catholic Charities throughout the state. One is we did a workshop called Building is a Moral Act. And what we did there was we focused diocesan building personnel throughout the state of Louisiana and anybody else that was interested. One of our presenters at that workshop was the IPCC. And one of the things she talked about was the fact that our future under climate change involves greater periods of monsoon rain followed by longer periods of drought, coupled with more intense hurricanes. So from a social justice perspective, given that scenario, we have to be involved in this issue because so many people will be, and it'll be the most vulnerable people and the poorest people. We also did a series of workshops through the Louisiana Interchurch Conference called Drinking Salty Water, A Taste of the Future. And the idea there was to talk about relative sea level rise in the communities. Then several years before that, we did a series called Let the Earth Bless the Lord. Many people from dioceses or from any church parish who were interested in learning more about environmental stewardship, one for the clergy in an attempt to get them to preach about environmental stewardship. It was written down on the coast at a research facility called LUMCON. And one of the things we set up for the priests was a seafood boil. We had priests and deacons and one bishop attending. Well, we knew it was going to be a success when our opening prayer, which was Kyrie, was sort of surreptitiously interrupted by people attending, looking up and sniffing every once in a while because the seafood boil was wafting into the cafeteria. So at that point, we realized we had them. And it was quite a successful presentation. It's something in the Louisiana Church Conference, Interchurch Conference, called the Ezekiel 34 Initiative. And that's from Ezekiel, where it says, "Is it not enough for you to have the best pasture, that you must trample the rest with your feet? Is it not enough for you to drink it, that you must muddy the rest with your feet?" And so in that effort, we went throughout the state, convinced people in local churches that they should be involved in environmental stewardship. We also prepared a grant a long time ago from the USCCB Environmental Justice Program. We prepared a PowerPoint presentation called The Cool of the Day, sort of Environmental Stewardship 101, as an introduction to what the scripture social teaching says about environmental stewardship. And that's been quite successfully, quite positively received throughout our diocese and in other countries represented. Of course, we've also participated in the Catholic Climate Covenant's St. Francis Day workshops. Of the background of some of the things that we've done in terms of educating people, we've also, at a practical level, to respond to those disasters that have come with increasing frequency. And specifically, we've spent just in this small diocese since Katrina in 2005, which was then followed by Rita, and then Gustav, Ike, and Isaac. Thank you, Maggie. We've spent $7 million helping families recover from damage like you see on the screen. And so figure about 7,600 families all total. 2,300 of those were direct assistance for repairs to their homes. Others, several thousand, received disaster cleanup kits or free tuition for their children to attend school, Catholic schools. But $7.7 million. Now, in this slide, one of our board members and myself are reviewing some of the damage. What you see in the picture was, of course, all covered in grass before the storm. And after the storm, it was solid mud. Now that has benefits because the land accretes when this mud is deposited. But when it gets in your house, it's just awful stuff because it very quickly takes over and mold and mildew and everything else set in. And you can see this home is elevated, but the one next to it was not and had water in it. So Catholic Charities, and this is Betty Jane Adams, who was to receive a TRAC lift house. Now, TRAC is the Terrebonne Readiness and Assistance Coalition. And Catholic Charities is a founder of that. It was founded right after Hurricane Andrew in 1992. And this is the house, the first track house. Catholic Charities has helped sponsor 5 of these. And you can see Betty in the white shirt at the bottom of a lid. We have, Charities has installed 198 of these throughout our diocese. Again, because people have to elevate their homes, continue to live in this area in the face of sea level rise and the increased number of hurricanes. This is an house that was designed by architects and engineers at MIT and custom the bayou here. Track, as I said, is a local nonprofit, and their offices are right upstairs in the building where I'm currently housed. But this is just one of those things, you get in and you push the green button to go and the red button to stop. And we put these up for people that they can't access their home. Either they're too old or they're handicapped, or the kind of disability that prevents them from going up and down stairs. We build these lifts for about $7,000 a home. And as I said, we've done 198 of them. We've also put in 29 ramps for homes that aren't quite this high ramp for wheelchair access. We've also helped elevate 42 homes like this one. There's a whole industry down here in South Louisiana now dealing with climate change because people have to raise houses like this one that are on just a regular wood. People are raising houses on a concrete slab. It costs more than the house is worth in many cases, but they're doing it. So $700,000 building these lifts throughout our diocese. So that's the Charities is dealing with climate change. One, we educate people through the various workshops that I talked about, services in terms of disaster assistance. We also advocate, of course, for climate change legislation, coastal restoration legislation. And we help organize track, as I said, and we continue to organize every hurricane season agencies that can help during storm season. So that, in a nutshell, is the way that our Catholic Charities here in the diocese is responding. And point, Maggie, we'll see if Dan's back online.
Well, I am happy to say that Dan is back on, and his microphone seems to be working just fine, so he'll be coming on in a minute, and I'm going to back up the slides. Dan, say hello to everyone. Dan, I'm going to let you mess around for a second while I back up these slides. So have you pulled out your earphones? Because I can see your mouth moving, but I can't hear anything. Can you hear me?
Questions, Maggie, if anybody has any.
So Dan, we still can't hear you. So I'm going to let you do that, and I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions for Rob and the work that they're doing in Catholic Charities in Houma Thibodeau for right now. Dan, we'll come back to you in just a second, but I don't have any questions right now, but if people will please drop down in the question area over on your left-hand side and make sure that it says send to presenters, then both of the presenters will be able to see this. And Dan, I don't know, maybe we'll have you type some things into there and then I'll read it out loud if you can't be heard. So if any of our people online have any, oops, I'm hearing someone. Dan? Nope, not Dan. All right, well, I'll ask a question then. So Rob, I didn't tell you this when I met you before, but my family is a Katrina survivor from the coast of Mississippi. So my mother had water in her home and was living in one of those, not as lovely a house as you guys provided, but a trailer. And so when you talk to the people that were giving you forecasts for the future, did they have some sense of how many more storms or how severe the storms might be? What are they predicting in terms of severity for the future?
Prediction is that the storms will be more intense, not necessarily more so intense. We've been quite blessed in the last 6 or 7 years, with the exception of Isaac, to evacuate in that entire period of time. So we've been, of course, the East Coast has been catching it because I think of the way that the Gulf Stream has been moving. The El Nino has been things out into the Atlantic instead of the Gulf. But that will most likely shift at some point.
I'll ask another question.
Serious.
Okay.
On the line has done successful presentations in their diocese or have had to respond and specifically.
Yay. Hello. Is that you, Dan?
Is it working now?
It's working. We're going to jump right ahead and let Dan do his thing, and then I'm going to later ask more questions, and hopefully our participants will be happy to put their questions down. I'm going to mute myself and go off camera. Dan, you have control of the slides, and we're looking forward to hearing your report.
Thank you. Hi, sorry about that. Had some technical difficulties. Everything was working perfectly beforehand, and then it just cut out right when I was supposed to go. So before I begin today, I just wanted to say thank you very much for giving me the space, and I'm looking forward to being able to present on a little bit of work we're doing down here in Guatemala, primarily with Guatemalan farmers. So Guatemala, just quickly, is a country just to the south of Mexico, about 15 million people, a very diverse country with over 17 different ecosystems, and basically almost any crop you can imagine can grow down here. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what we're seeing in our projects and the families we're working with. And primarily we're seeing a couple of different changes which are really quite similar to what Rob was talking about in Louisiana. And that's that the climate is changing, so we're seeing different phenomena that we have not seen before, and we're also seeing a more volatile climate. So it's not necessarily that it's raining less or it's raining more, but it's raining in shorter spurts, so you'll have 100 millimeters fall in one single day, but then you'll go 30 days without any kind of rain. And so this causes a lot of different problems for our farmers. In the top right-hand corner, we can see a farmer who's looking over his coffee farm, which has been wiped out by the coffee rust, which is a fungus that reacts very much to changes in temperature, for instance, lower minimum temperatures during the nighttime. And then in the bottom two slides, we have a farmer looking at her maize crop, her corn crop, which was wiped out by intense rains and then long periods of 3 or 4 weeks without rains. So this is really just kind of throwing off the whole farming cycle. Farmers aren't sure when they should be planting, when they should be harvesting, if they should apply fertilizer or not, because there might not be any moisture in the soils. So they're kind of guessing as to what kind of weather or climate they'll be getting, and this has been leading to a lot of adverse consequences for most of our farmers. Just some short stats that I have from what we've been seeing in Guatemala is that the dry corridor, which is a portion of the country that's used to be about a quarter of the country, now the dry corridor has grown to about half of the country. So these are parts of the country that used to get rain pretty regularly during the growing season, but now we're seeing gaps of rain and then no rain, which right after you plant, you might get a bit of rain, and then it stops raining for 3 weeks, and farmers lose everything they've planted. Another example is the past 3 years have been exceptionally dry, and our farmers have been losing between 50 and 75% of their corn crop the past 3 years. And this is leading to families having to look for different ways to generate income, which might be to migrate off farm, to go work on a bigger farm as a day laborer, but they're having to leave their families and look for different ways to earn income. So I wanted to talk specifically about 3 families that we work with. On the left, we have the Gomez family, which are maize and corn growing families. And there's Mr. Gomez with his 4 children. And on the right, we have 2 coffee growing couples. So we have the Cano family up here on the top right, and the Ramirez family in the bottom right. I'm going to talk specifically about these coffee farmers. I put a little quote from Laudato Si on this slide, which I think is very pertinent to what we've been seeing. That these families, these poor families that are farming in rural Guatemala, they're exceptionally dependent on the earth. It's the way they get their food, it's the way they get their money, it's the way they generate income to send their kids to school, to go to the doctors if need be, to cut some wood or to gather firewood for their energy in their house. They depend on the earth for everything that's going on in their lives. So any kind of change or fragility of the earth automatically impacts harder on them, as they're already quite vulnerable families, but then are very closely linked to the earth. So the Cano family here in the top right, they've had a very interesting journey. They were a family living in the highlands of Guatemala. And about 25 years ago, during the Civil War in Guatemala, which started in the 60s, they were forced to leave the country, and they moved to Mexico for what they thought would be 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Well, it ended up being 16 years that they were in Mexico before they were able to come back to Guatemala. And when they finally came back in 1995, them and 20 other families that were in exile with them bought a small coffee farm. However, they were not coffee farming families. So in those first few years, they were learning about the crop, learning how to take care of it, and they were just starting to get some results and generate some income. And then about 5 to 7 years ago, they started to see differences. There were plagues and pests attacking their coffee crop that they'd never seen before at that altitude. And they had to start looking at different ways to protect their crop. So this problem they were dealing with is the coffee leaf rust, which a couple of years ago got quite a bit of attention in the American press. Basically, it wiped out Central American coffee for the past few years, and farmers slowly have been starting to plant new varieties that are able to resist the coffee leaf rust. And what was really interesting about rust is that originally it was only seen at very low altitudes where you might get kind of your basic so-so coffee. But slowly over the past few years, it's been migrating up the mountain slowly, attacking the higher quality or Arabica coffee. So farmers that haven't used to had to deal with these kinds of problems are now looking at new ways to plant their coffee and deal with these pressures. The Ramirez family, which is down here in the bottom right, have also been dealing with coffee rust. They also have a pretty interesting story. They're a family of 5 brothers, and the mother and the father are still alive. And all the brothers are married and have several children. And they take all their decisions together as a family. So they'll come together once a week with the father and the mother, and they'll decide what are they doing on their farm, what kinds of fertilizers or inputs they need to buy for their farm, what price are they going to sell their coffee at this year. And so the past few years, a lot of these meetings have been focused on stuff like coffee leaf rust, which again, the Ramirez family is about at 4,000 feet above sea level. So they used to be pretty secure and not dealing with these kinds of climate pressures. And now they've started to see year after year their coffee plot be attacked with rust. So both of what these two families have decided they need to be doing to deal with problems like coffee rust is they need to start planning for the future. So we've been working as Catholic Relief Services with these farmers on upgrading their skill sets, so trying out different practices. Here on the left, we have farmers gathered for a training session with a local extensionist. And then on the right-hand side, we have farmers practicing how to graft their coffee plants. So basically, they have one variety on the bottom and one variety on the top. And the top variety is resistant to coffee leaf rust. So families have started to make these long-term decisions of how am I going to change my farm, or in other words, how am I going to change my small business so that I can adapt to these pressures that I haven't been seeing before. And the difficult point is that a lot of these families do not have any access to formal banking or formal credit. They have little in the way of savings. And when you plant a new coffee variety, you're looking at 3 or 4 years before you'll get your first harvest. So CRS is working with these farmers to provide them with bridging loans so that they can invest now in a plan that is climate smart or adapting to climate change. And then slowly 4 years from now, they'll begin to repay that credit for the original investment they made in different plants. Or in many cases, farmers are perhaps changing a bit of their coffee into a different crop so that they're not completely dependent on one crop. So maybe you deal with coffee leaf rust this year, and next year you're not dealing with coffee leaf rust, but then you also have a macadamia tree or some avocados. So when those things are producing, you can fall back on that rather than being dependent on their coffee. And these are a couple of the practices or the strategies we've been working with families such as the Ramirez and the Cano family. And I think it's important to realize as well that this isn't only families' livelihoods, but this is really the way they're living out in rural areas surrounded by their natural environments. So there's also quite a psychological toll that stuff like climate change is taking on our farmers. When you see your entire livelihood or your entire farm wiped out from one year to the next by changing temperatures or changing rain patterns, that can take quite a toll on your ability to think or plan for the future. So I just wrote down one quote from one of our farmers that he was pretty disappointed a few years ago when he lost his crop, and he said, when you look at your dried crops, there's sadness. It's what you live off, and it's what your children live off. Well, that same family now has been 2 years of waiting for their new coffee crop, and next year we're hopefully going to see their first harvest of a new resistant variety, and they'll have a harvest to sell again to the market. So as the Pope said in Laudato Si', I think we have to recognize that there is hope for this situation. I think there were good decisions made in Paris, but we are at a critical point where families are going to certainly have to start adapting their practices in the developing world if they're going to continue on as farmers. So thanks a lot. Those are a few of my points from Guatemala.
So I'll keep talking, even though there comes my picture. Dan, that was super. And Rob, also really enjoyed the stories that you were also telling as you witnessed the climate change in the boot of Louisiana. So as I thank both the presenters, this is a time that both of them are happy to answer any questions that you might have. Once again, if you look on the black bar on the left of your screen, there is at the very bottom, there's a little box where you can type your message in. And I encourage you now to ask any questions that you may have, and both of the presenters will engage in answering the questions that you might have. And while I'm waiting for someone, I'm sure someone's busily typing or organizing their notes or their thoughts. I will ask this of both of you. Of course, it's two different realities, two different countries. But so often I have had people say to me, oh, well, why don't they move if there's problems there, if there's flooding there, if there's big storms there? Do you have a response to that? Why don't people move?
Yeah, I mean that's often a question we get for our coffee farmers, because as you move up in altitude or up the mountain, the coffee is actually better quality, and you don't have to deal with quite as many pests and plagues that you do at lower levels. Unfortunately, there's already families living further up the mountain than them and farming coffee, so they're kind of stuck where they are. And unless they're just going to completely abandon their farm and the place where they live, they have to find new ways to adapt to a changing climate and new ways of doing business, really, to stay competitive.
Yeah. Rob, did you want to weigh in?
What we say down here in South Louisiana is, especially after Sandy, we just come back with, well, people shouldn't be living on Long Island because it's just not fit for human habitation. And so that quickly puts an end to that discussion.
Well, good. People have started asking questions then. One of our people who are listening in, Lonnie, has asked, my experience is that many farmers are noticing changes in the climate, but that they aren't tracking news and analysis of climate change per se. Is that your experience working with these people who are working in the land?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in our case, a lot of these farmers we are working with are in very rural areas, in quite poor communities, and they're not very plugged into infrastructure. And even if they were, the Guatemalan infrastructure or government services is not of the highest quality. So although there often is at kind of a national level information on, oh, well, this is going to be a warmer year, or the rains are going to be a few weeks late this year, our farmers are not often plugged into that information to make kind of the week-to-week or day-to-day decisions they need to make to ensure that their crop is safe this year. Something I didn't mention that we are working quite a bit on is having almost local point people to be tracking rainfall and to be tracking temperatures, and then at the very community or a subsidiarity level, diffusing that information to 15 or 20 other families in their communities. So even if they're not maybe plugged into the national scientific system, they are getting information at the community level that they're sharing amongst their peers.
Well, great. Now, I have two different responses. One is from a gentleman who is going to be bringing a college trip down to Guatemala, and he wants to know if he can have your contact information. Dan, I can get that to him personally, or you can, with that same type your message here, you can find out, maybe you can see his question and just write to him directly. Frank Daggett is... and I think he's from Maine because he has a second question. But do you mind if we share that information with him?
No, that's great. I'll just type it in right now.
Oh, okay, great. So now Rob Gorman, our presenter here, has asked the question about what our bishops are doing in the United States, and have they promoted Laudato Si in their diocese, and have they asked us to do anything about the encyclical? The answer is yes. Our bishops have done a lot, including 40 of them came to a specific training in June so that we could develop a common voice that spoke about the moral call of Laudato Si. In addition, Catholic Climate Covenant was involved in training bishops at their June meeting so that all of them got this message on a common voice. We've had 120 or 140 bishops sign on to various letters or things in which they are supporting Laudato Si. There's been a number of press conferences all over the United States where we were very involved in 6 of them over the summer. And they took place at really great locations, like at a wind farm in Iowa, with the bishops present and talked about issues there. So we have been very, very involved in helping to promote and spread this word, Rob, if that's any help to you. We also have resources online. If you go to our website, you can certainly see what resources we have involved. Catholic Climate Covenant, I'm going to just click over to that slide that has all of our contact information on it. But we have a lot of resources that are free to the public, and so I invite you guys to check out, people who are interested, at CatholicClimateCovenant.org. Specifically, Rob, we have something called the Feast of St. Francis annual program, but you can get previous years as well. It's a 90-minute program on climate change, in particular ecology. The second program that we have are creation care teams, which are meant to be school-based and or parish-based programs that help groups of individuals pray, study, educate, advocate, all on the issue of climate change, both personally as well as the communities that they're with. So there's a lot of resources that are available on this issue. Are you going to say something?
A lot of resources. I'm disappointed, frankly, that here in Louisiana, although we're probably as much as affected by climate change, as a group, our bishops have not asked any of our agencies to respond in any aggressive way to Laudato Si. And I'm looking at the here, and so I see some dioceses have responded, or some bishops have asked the diocese to respond. Sense that across the country there are many bishops in their own diocese saying we really need to respond to this, and I'd like Catholic Charities or Peace and Justice Office or somebody to take the lead in doing that.
Yeah, we actually
I see Lonnie.
Go ahead. What I was just going to say is that we work closely with Catholic Relief Services in Baltimore, and they have been especially helpful in sending us press information every 2 weeks. I think we get a press report that talks about how often climate justice, climate change, environmental issues are in the news. And I think at one point we had documented well over 5,000 examples from the time of Laudato Si having been released until through the papal visit. So I do think it's there's headway, there's steam that's happening. It's certainly at the grassroots level. I think at the grass tops level with our bishops, many of them are involved, and others are just beginning to wave that flag, if you will. So I suspect that more and more of them will be getting on the bandwagon as time goes on. So we have another participant who has said that in Maine, this is Frank again, our bishop published a joint statement along with the Episcopal bishop, and the encyclical has been promoted in the diocesan magazine and soon in parish social ministry resources. And then Lonnie has responded that that we at Catholic Climate Covenant have been able to track a lot of what bishops are doing, and at least 110 bishops made a statement or offered resources in some way out of the 176 active bishops. So I guess in church parlance, that's probably lightning speed to have had an encyclical just 6 months old that has had 110 bishops somehow affirm its content and do something. Any other questions for our presenters or any other comments? Please feel free to type them in at the bottom of your screen.
The Atlanta Archdiocese, Lonnie Ellis, says that the Atlanta Archdiocese just put out a large action plan. And Lonnie, if you could maybe get that up to the Catholic Climate Covenant, that'd be a great resource for everybody to tap into.
Lonnie, you should do that. I'm kidding. Lonnie Ellis is the Associate Director of the Catholic Climate Covenant. So we have that resource here, and we can certainly send it to you. It's a very robust and really pretty incredible plan for a diocese to have put together. So we'll be happy to share that with you. Here's a question. How do you demonstrate to skeptics that changes are due to climate change and not random variations?
Usually that translates for us down here in Louisiana as it was winter. How can we have climate change if it was cold in the winter? And people, confuse weather with. And so I think one of the things we try to tell people is the same thing that everybody else says, is that you term the patterns. You can't look at individual weather events or even a year's worth of weather events. You have to look at the long-term changes. I find that, as I think most of us have found, is that the country's pretty divided on this. Those who really don't want to believe in this and are truly skeptical aren't going to change their minds at this point until something affects them more personally. With us, it's just trying to tell people the difference between weather and climate.
Yeah. Dan, do you have something you want to say? I'm sorry, I'm giving him the sign that we're not hearing him. Well, not knowing what that is and knowing that we've reached our time, I'm sorry, Dan, that it's been such a struggle, but really kudos to you from having come all the way in from Guatemala. Let me just read you some of the other comments that have been made by people. 150. Some people have asked about people in the Archdiocese of, they haven't seen anything coming from the Archdiocese, but in her parish, they've taken this up themselves. And in January, they're going to be hosting a 3-series program on the encyclical. So that's good news. And then someone else asks if there is a resource you used in your diocese that priests can use to preach on climate change. And Robert Gorman wrote back that Father Ray Kemp did the presentation to their clergy, and he's at Preaching the Just Word. I'll also say that Catholic Climate Covenant is currently looking for funding. We're planning a very similar thing to Preaching the Just Word that would be specifically preaching on Laudato Si, so that we could better train our priests to get the word out from the pulpit. So what else? Lonnie tells us again that some really cool work has been done by Chicago. They have announced that they are benchmarking in terms of energy use and water usage in all 2,700 of the Archdiocesan buildings. We had a press conference this summer in which our executive director was there, as well as Archbishop Supich and the head of the EPA. So they're doing some pretty serious work on climate and being responsible. Let's see what else here. Atlanta Archdiocese, we've just put out a large action plan for their parishes. And a recent poll said that 35% of Catholics reported that Pope Francis influenced their views on climate change. So 35% of Catholics and 16% of the general public have said that the Pope has been a primary influence on their attitude towards climate change. There's a lot going on in Maine. There have been several forums, including an interfaith forum on Laudato Si, as well as several parish-based discussion groups. And then this is true with Catherine Ferlani writes, I understand that Renew will be publishing a resource focused on the Pope's encyclical. So there are more and more resources coming out, and they are certainly available to people. And with that, I would just like to say we've met our time commitment here. I want to thank you all for being here with us today, listening to our stories from witnesses for climate change. And more webinars are going to be scheduled from the Catholic Climate Covenant in the future. And as we continue through this Advent season, I wish you Advent blessings. This webinar is part of the free programming that's done by Catholic Climate Covenant. And if you've not already made a donation to Catholic Climate Covenant, I ask you to prayerfully consider that in your year-end givings. I'll also mention that Catholic Charities and Homa Thibodeau, and as well as Catholic Relief Services, their Guatemala program, all could use your support. If you're looking for our information, we've put our website right on the slide that you're watching. So I want to say thank you very much to Dan. Thank you very much to Rob. This has been really super to hear directly from people who have directly been affected by pretty serious consequences of climate change. So on behalf of all of us at Catholic Climate Covenant, thank you so much for participating. And to the public, thank you as well. Goodbye.